all airmen are capable of accomplishing tasks outside their core specialty based on their capacity.
Welcome to the Air Force Doctrine Podcast. My name is Nicholas Underwood. On this episode, I sit down with Chief Master Sergeant Sells and discuss the origin and future of the Air Force's multi-capable airman concept. Chief Master Sergeant Jason R. Sells is the Senior Enlisted Leader to the Deputy Chief of Staff for Logistics, Engineering, and Force Protection at Headquarters U.S. Air Force in the Pentagon. In this capacity, he serves as the Principal Enlisted Advisor to the Deputy Chief of Staff on all enlisted force development, morale, welfare, readiness, and mission generation Air Force logistics. Chief Sells has been involved with the creation and development of the multi-capable airman concept since the early days of development and currently leads the Air Force's MCA Development Working Group at Headquarters Air Force. Here's our discussion. Chief Sells, thank you so much for being here today. This is a very exciting opportunity. The multi-capable airman concept, it touches every part of the Air Force. We've heard the Chief recently say that we are all multi-capable airmen. We heard on a previous podcast different ways that AFSOC is getting at this. I talked to airmen at different AFA conferences. They're all excited about it. They want to learn more. They want to do more. We're working with some of the brightest people in the country wearing the Air Force uniform. They're after this concept, but we owe them more information, so I hope we can do that today. And so you've been involved in this, as I said in your bio, from the almost the inception of the idea through the current development, and you're looking towards the future. So let's really dig into it, but let's start with the basics. What is the multi-capable airman concept as you see it?
Yeah. Hey, thanks, sir. And thanks to LeMay Center for having me on for this. So this is pretty important as we hear the Chief and he gets out there and he talks about this. One thing that he says to us, especially up on the air staff, is that I can't have ACE without MCA, but I can have MCA without ACE. And that gets into that all airmen are MCA. But what in fact does that mean, right? Well, first off, I'm going to tell you right now, MCA is not a program. All right. So please, nobody out there frame this that MCA is a program. MCA absolutely starts with the mindset, and it gets after that. You know, you have to realize that those functional boundaries or those functional lines that we have that are out there, that those are designed for how we assess and how we grow technical expertise. But once when you gain that technical expertise, you have to be able to learn. This is about providing a capability. We get so focused on being platform or functional specific versus what are the effects or the capability we're trying to deliver. What I really love is when you get into Doctrine Note 1-21, that definition that we put in there absolutely sums up what is MCA. Obviously, I know that it was very tied to as we started this back during the journey in 2019 of ACE, but it still applies. You know, airmen with broad and cross-functional, along with those expeditionary skills to adapt and overcome challenges, and that they are trained as a multidisciplinary team outside the core AFSC. Where we are now, where we're trying to go with this as we move on, is that we look at that what our end state we're trying to get to is. So all airmen are capable of accomplishing tasks outside their core specialty based on their capacity. The capacity is very important as we perform these additional tasks with available resources and within an acceptable level of risk, right? So as we characterize this to commanders is what's the risk that we're willing to accept, but that individual capacity is very important. But then when you go past that, right, and we look at that, so that's all airmen being MCA, but there are some airmen that have the capacity to be able to take on more responsibility, that they can handle more bandwidth that comes on. And that's when we get into these multidisciplinary teams to be able to support agile combat deployment as we know it today. So that's where we look at this and we try and frame this up is that, yes, all airmen are MCA in some form or fashion or some capacity, but not all airmen are going to have that capacity that is able to execute within that scheme of maneuver when we get into that high-end fight.
Thanks, Chief. I really like that. I like how you hit on capacity as opposed to some of the terms like do more with less. We're not asking folks to do more with less. We're asking what can you do? What are you capable of? And trying to get that on to fill that extra capacity that you have, not asking you to create capacity that you don't have. Is that fairly accurate?
It is, right? And so I think the question that we got to start looking at is the other thing too with MCA is this is not additional duty. Please, right. There's such a negative context that comes with MCAs and additional duty. What we ought to really look at is what these airmen that are taking on more responsibility, what are some things that they're going to stop doing? Right. That's the things that I would say commanders and SELs that are out there is that if we want to be able to get after the capability of our mission or to be able to enhance our readiness, what are some of the things that we're going to have some of these airmen that are out there to be able to stop doing, whether there's are some additional duties that they're performing where they are doing a safety program, or they're the scheduler or the training for the organization for their section particularly. Maybe that's something that we have other airmen that are not being identified for those additional skill sets that they bring to the fight.
And so MCA also implies there are things we may have to stop doing in order to do things that we need to do. What I want to shift to, I want to talk about the origin of the MCA concept. And so it definitely came out in the ACE doctrine note. But as you envision this concept, as we looked at it, is it strictly tied to ACE as it developed? It was ACE first, or was MCA first, or is this all kind of coming together?
Yeah, so great question. And so this all started with adaptive basing, right? This is where it all started. It started with adaptive basing, and then obviously between futures and as we determined the concept transition into adaptive operations in a contested environment, and so that's when we got into agile combat employment. And so obviously that is a proactive and reactive scheme and maneuver. And as we have been doing distributed operations, we've been doing this for a long time. All right. We have concepts that are out there where we take contingency response, and those are all made up of multi-capable airmen. We have had some actual frameworks that are there that have already been developed underneath maintenance. We've always had cross-utilization training. It's great because we've all been throwing out this term cut, but the Air Force just now formalized it about 3 weeks ago into the Air Force training program again. So before that, it's been pulled out and only assigned to maintenance training. So, but as we went through, it transitioned to ACE, and that's when we realized, hey, if we are moving forward and we're trying to underneath the CAF mindset with the fighters, if we're trying to be able to execute this, we can't take a full 250 to 500 aviation force package. We are going to have to scale down. We're going to have to find out which common skill sets that are there with a reasonable, acceptable risk to be able to continue to project air power, which is pretty important when we look at this, because the way we generate is by functional specialties. And that's even on the operator side, right? And we look at it under the maintenance, we look underneath logistics, communications. And so because of all this, especially with General Brown getting in there, we looked at the action orders and accelerate, change, or lose. Everyone has been thinking about a different way of thinking. It's been thinking more about what capability can we produce, and started to think about, do we really need these AFSCs, or what AFSCs do we not have that we should be having? And then commanders are actually looking at this of, how do I sit there and employ in a better way to get after our capability?
I want to pull one thing out that you said, understanding that cut training is spark of the idea that is allowed us to envision what MCA could be at a much more operational level. Cut training very much being the tactical. A lot of our maintainers, or those close to the maintenance career field, will understand what that is. So just so that the kind of the seminal idea of cut training is, can you explain that just a little bit for those maybe not familiar?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you look at it here, cut training is defined in DAFMAN 36-2689. And the definition of cut training is specific functional training, allowing individuals to perform tasks outside of their primary AFSCs to enhance mission readiness and increase operational capability. What does that mean? Well, when we look at life cycle training, everybody knows about the career field education training plan, and you look at all those tasks. Those are all tasks that career field functional managers all come together and they design. These are the tasks for our AFSCs to be able to execute. But what is not in there is job qualification tasks. And so that's what you see on the legacy form of Air Force Form 797. Those are the cut tasks. Anything that is not inside your CFETP, those are additional tasks that are identified there to execute at the unit, that still require mission qualifications, but may not necessarily apply across to the entire AFSC when you scope that out. So in the end, cut is a capability.
You brought up the CFETP, which is, for lack of an aviation analogy, is just training records, the proverbial letter of X's. And so I want to pull that apart. I've heard a lot of people refer to MCA as a something that would be a letter of X's, another list of on my training forms of things I want to check off. Is that the vision?
No. The short answer is no, it's not. Here's why. So when we look at all airmen or MCA, you don't need a letter of X, right? I don't need somebody to tell me build a training plan so that I can get after supporting somebody during an operation. When we walk around there and we look at a maintenance organization, say we'll use a fighter generation squadron, and we go into the unit and we see that there are airmen with some downtime. Maybe they're taking a break. That's great. But when there is maintenance going on out there, are we being highly effective by having airmen sit around and kind of wait till their next task comes up, or are they getting out there and executing that task? But not necessarily we need a letter of X's, but we do need training plans when we look at it to build what does that mission qualification look like for our mission generation teams or our mission sustainment teams that we are currently in development out there across the MAGCOM. So the fact is, the connotation of letter of X's, it's very clear. We've developed what's called a table of authorizations, which was to help develop a baseline for airmen that are being trained to be able to enable ACE, so that between multiple CAF platforms that are out there, between if I transfer from PCS from PACAF and I go to USAFE, that MCA skill set, those skills transfer over. And then what I'll also talk about is that why we develop these table of authorizations that get after this is receive the letter of X's is to help characterize risk. It is a minimum baseline that we develop for them to be able to be trained to, but also it helps that we find like similarity between AFSCs, but it gives that force element commander an opportunity to determine and see how can they best employ their forces as they're executing, especially in ACE.
I really like that, and it's something we haven't mentioned yet, but all these concepts, ACE, MCA, and I'll throw out Mission Command, how much of these are tied together. You talked about the commander being able to understand the risk and reduce the risk. Excellent example of accepting prudent risk by mitigating like career fields. The other thing we talk about in an upcoming doctrine note of Mission Command is this term you've used multiple times called capacity. And in the doctrine note, it talks about capacity as the gauge of how much an organization has adopted the principles of mission command. And in this sense, we're talking about the airman, the example you gave of an airman taking a break, but mission needs to happen. In this case, it would be the airman understanding the mission needs to happen, understanding that intent, and instead of waiting to being told what to do, realizing something needs to do, using that extra skill set or that cut training that we provide them to go out there and get after the mission. Am I capturing the vision?
Yes, sir. We talk about this, right? I relate it to me. So, my core background is aircraft weapons. When we go and we're downrange and we're executing the tasking order that's out there, I get a fragmentary order, right? I get a frago, and I never really pay attention. But the one thing I cared about in that frago was what was the standard conventional load that I had to go execute. So what were the munitions? What were the fuse settings? I get all this in there. I had no idea that it was listing out the situation, the mission, the execution, the administration and the command signal. I would just say that especially on the combat support side, we do not empower and inform our NCOs to understand what it means when we talk about SMEAC, that acronym there that comes out of the 5-paragraph type order. As we go through this, because a lot of us just execute that, hey, you have a shift supervisor or you have a section chief who's issuing out tasks to you and everything. But if we start talking in these distributed mission command as we move this out, it's going to help us be able to execute to where we are able to understand exactly that intent. And that's an important piece as we move forward into this, is that we're going to be pushing mission command down. Right. And I don't mean in the way of like, hey, we're just going to be delegating. No, it's the fact is that because we're going to have senior NCOs, we may even have tech sergeants that are out there in charge of this mission generation out at a contingency location. And what happens when you've lost communication? Do you still have that mission type order to know what you're going to be able to execute? Is that pilot that's landing there, are they bringing in orders with them so that you can be able to execute and deliver that? I'm excited for this. I'm really glad to see this doctrine note start to take shape And we're pushing this within our working group as well to make sure that we're including these in some of these training objectives as we get after this.
That's fantastic, Chief. We could pull this apart for hours. I'm a big fan of Mission Command and multi-capable airmen. I want to keep going in terms of the MCA piece. I know you guys are working out of the group. In a separate conversation, you had mentioned there's a Frago coming. So what are you guys actively doing to push more information out about MCA?
So right now, what has been published is there is an ACE training and certification Frago. In that order, and you can read it, it's just like a 5-paragraph mission type order when you get into there. It has listed out what are the weight of training as you go through AFRIGEN. It has how we operate at the tactical and operational levels. And in there, it spells out what is the MCA, and it actually highlights the MCA framework. And it talks about the cut training. It talks about the ready airman training, integrated will sit in there, and that this is absolutely not just for ACE, but also as we execute the mission in a deployed environment, we still need airmen that are multi-capable. So the ACE training certification Frago has been pushed out. The ACE staff training and certification task order has been pushed out. And then there will be an XAB training and certification task order that's rolling out as well. And then obviously the doctrine note for Mission Command. Because of all this, we absolutely realize that because we fully recognize that the field is confused on what does it mean that all airmen are MCA and what is MCA for ACE. So the intent of this Frago is absolutely to be able to help formalize MCA training objectives to help develop cross-functional competencies so that we can execute operations across a full range of military operations for air power employment. So that is what we're trying to be able to do. It's not to be so prescriptive, but it's to help define some definitions that are out there. Take what Chief's intent is of what all airmen means for MCA, but then help characterize what the risk is and what force element commanders should be looking at as they are designing their force to be able to get after the mission.
Chief, thanks for that. Question I have, let's say that Mission Command, ACE, multi-capable airmen, the information we're pushing out there, we get it out to the force, we start to develop this, we embody this. 10 years from now, what is your vision? What does this look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's something that we get constantly as well. I think what we will see is that we are still trying to institutionalize MCA. And why is that? Because we're still trying to continue to evolve and develop MCA as we move along. What we hopefully that we see is that we are building MCA into our life cycle training so that when an airman's going through, pacer forwards as they go through basic military training and they're getting that foundational exposure during basic training, that all that exposure and all that fundamental training that they get just doesn't stop as they leave BMT, and that when they roll into technical training, that yes, some of them are learning the first time what a hand tool is, or they're learning how to be able to use some systems that they haven't seen before. But at the same time, that they are also continue to be able to build this to where MCA is part of our culture, that is part of our DNA. What I would envision is that when we talk about all airmen or MCA, that we talk about this just like every Marine's a rifleman. I would eventually love to see to where that we don't say that we need MCA, we'll say that we need airmen, right? Because we do need airmen that are multi-skilled, that are out there. Going into the future, so what I always say is that MCA is not a workforce or an AFSC restructuring, but it could potentially highlight where some of our gaps and seams are as we start looking at this. And we may find that as we continue to mature, especially AFRIGEN, and we look at our capabilities, that this potentially could end up leading into some of our other AFSCs that we are redesigning to be able to help look at those similarities, because we are smarter, we are evolving, we are better as we move into this. So especially when you look at the Air Force future operating concept, I mean, multi-capable airmen is a big part of the future when we talk about these 6 fights and move forward. So it's an important piece. So I hopefully to see that we mature MCA. We will always need some form of a multi-capable airman to get after those specialized teams. But in the end, that all airmen are MCA, and that we just say that's who we are. As an airman, we are multi-capable.
I really like that. We've always said that our people are our greatest asset, and this is really leaning into that concept. It's fantastic. I want to thank you for getting here because I want to give you this final question and have that kind of be how we close. So, Chief, again, thanks so much for being here. In this final remark, Chief, usually developing our CGOs, developing the junior NCOs and senior NCOs out there. With all the work you've done on the MCA, I want to give you an opportunity here in closing to talk directly to them as they're out there doing the hard work, trying to change our culture, change the way we function to meet this concept. So what is your message to them?
So I look at this and I characterize a couple things. So we look at what is impeding us from moving forward, and I say service culture and mindset. When we're under crisis, right? When you look at what just happened, a couple years ago when we evacuated Afghanistan, under crisis, I think all of us are built into where this ethos, because we all wear this uniform, that no matter what is going on, we're going to be able to help out, whether you're trained or not, right? I mean, nobody, our adversaries don't care and look at that you're over here saying, I'm not trained in this, I can't help you. No, you're going to be able to make that mission happen. It's deliberately to move forward. So what we have done is that we've got to look at this from our culture. And we have to realize that we're not protecting our heritage of our Air Force specialty. We have to look at this as, how do we get after this from a capability standpoint? What I would offer to our leaders out there, especially in the CGOs, the NCOs, the senior NCOs, I would look at this, that this is leadership. And as we're getting after change, one thing I loved is Dr. Cotter talks about, change management. And when we look at this, is that change is about managing the complexity from the management side. On the leadership side, it's helping cope with the change. And so as we go through this, right, what is the intent when we look at the complexity of it as we're managing this, but then about coping with it? What's the message that we're sending to our airmen that are working for us, right? Trying to be able to help shape this. As we move forward and we go through this, we have to realize that we are a very risk averse force. In some areas, in some mission sets, we should be risk averse. When you look at surety, absolutely. We get more flexibility to move to conventional. And then as we get into that high-end schema maneuver, when we talk about ACE, we need a lot more flexibility. So when we talk about this and we talk about the mission command, this is all about that leadership. This is where we need to empower. And that is what MCA is. It is empowering. It's giving our airmen cross-functional skills. We're broadening their skill sets. And that makes us better as a service. It actually helps us grow. So I hope that they take that and they realize this, that go to your group commanders, go to your installation commanders, ask them, what is the intent? What decision authorities do I have to be able to execute as I move forward?
That's going to do it for this week's Doctrine Podcast. The show is produced and edited by the LeMay Center's Doctrine Outreach Division. Special thanks to the LeMay Center and Air University. As always, the views expressed by our guests and hosts are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of Air University, the Air Force, or any government agency. I'm Nicholas Underwood. We will see you next time.